Bitcoin. What is our business cycle model suggesting about Bitcoin and perhaps some of the other cryptocurrencies? It's June 22nd, 9:43 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm Rich Poston for Critical Point. This is a monthly chart of Bitcoin. We have not flipped the long-term labeling over to the latest type of labeling or names that we're using for these trends. So I'm showing 3-year business cycles that we would normally call LT1 when we're looking at prices and related fundamentals. When we go to macroeconomics, however, we may use put the cycles in terms of years, and we may use some of the more formal economic cycles, such as the juggler cycle that you can find online and taught in some universities. At any rate, the 3-year cycle may relate to something of the kitchen cycle on the macroeconomic side. The 3-year cycle, again, is LT1 and this new labeling from the model. We're assuming that a minor long-term 3-year business cycle or LT1 top occurred in April. The trend is down. So we are now long-term bears, but in a minor long-term perspective. In addition, timing-wise, the model is saying the bottom could have occurred anywhere from December till around August. So it is getting late to a decline. It may decline for only a few weeks, a couple of months, but it's probably not going to decline into year end unless there's some major cyclical structure that's not quite right and we don't understand, something more long term. Now, the problem with these 3 years or LT1 business cycles, they only work about half the time. But when they work, it's significant. It's serious. So it's kind of like we still have to follow it. We still have to consider it. Well, we've already had a sizable enough drop to say it's working. And I realize by your definition, you may say, well, gee, something that can only drop a few months is not long term. And I realize that, but when we're looking at these business cycles and we define them as long term, sometimes a trend within the business cycle can be very short because the other trend, in other words, if the uptrend lasted 90% of the potential time for that business cycle, and that's what it did, then you can only have 10% of the time for it to decline. And we still call that long-term and label it, even though I realize most people would say that's such a short period of time. How can you call it long-term? Well, sometimes what we find is the fundamentals, the news headlines, the economics, the psychology, whatever, is more significant than what you would expect for a brief down move. And sometimes the price action turns into like a crashing moment, last minute collapse that doesn't seem to relate to normal 2 to 3 month down moves. Okay, so the bottom line is we may yet learn of some that we're going to find the facts to meet a long-term business cycle bear market definition, even though it may not meet yours or other people's or analysts' requirements. Now, last night I was concerned when I was looking at it. I said, boy, if it violates last month's low, that's not a good sign. And it's done that this morning. It's in the news headlines, and many are saying trade below 30,000 is bearish. I don't have downside objectives for you. I don't know how valuable to work because, again, this is still a young market. It's still evolving to trading these same business cycles as in all the other markets, but it'll always keep its own little characteristic on a microeconomic level, okay? And so we don't know how well this will work. We don't know how much downside, but I must say my gut feeling is like trendline support is probably anywhere from like 11,000 all the way down to maybe recent chart support of 3,000 to 5,000. So there could be considerable downside, but I'm not saying that's what will occur. But I question, where is the support? There really isn't nothing until we can get into that 11,000 on down to maybe 6 and even on down to 3,000. So there could be a crashing moment for Bitcoin, but there's no way of guaranteeing, there's no way of showing the probability of that scenario, okay? Until we see violation of this month's high at 41,299.27, I am long-term bearish, but realize I may only be bearish for a few weeks to a few months here, and then we'll get this business cycle top in. Now, I've warned you that I've been suspicious that somehow Bitcoin might put in a major long-term top during the first half of this decade and may not be bullish later this decade as the economy continues to grow and the stock market pounds out record highs. Something could work against it. Well, the problem is we really don't have enough history with Bitcoin or any of these currencies to know what it is. Okay, where would be a major long term? If there was a major long term top here, well, we probably need at least one more 3-year business cycle bull market, and maybe more than one. If for some reason this was the major top, then yes, I would be concerned that Bitcoin can go much lower than people think. It might yet go down to 150 or some crazy thing. Okay, and it could stay off the highs for years. Unfortunately, I thought we were onto something, but unfortunately, we just don't have the data, the history to put this together. When would we see a major long-term top in Bitcoin? And with the economies growing this decade, I'm kind of thinking, unless people say, I don't need to store money in Bitcoin, I'd rather be in real estate, I'd rather be in the stock market, I'd rather be in commodities, I'd rather be in bonds, okay, then, I don't know why they wouldn't support Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. Now, what's driving this to downside? I don't think it's your standard currency fundamentals. I don't think those fundamentals have... Everybody talks about their fundamentals that they find for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. I don't think it's got much fundamentals, frankly. It's just people want to gamble on it. They want to speculate it. And they try to legitimize it by saying, but it's a store of value. Well, it's a terrible store of value when you could lose maybe 90% of your money in it, okay? And I'm concerned people think store of value means a safe haven. It's nowhere near the meeting requirements of a safe haven. It can be a store of value, but gosh, I think you got to manage it, So what we do have, however, is discussion that China might declare war on cryptocurrency. That's sending ripples around the world. There may be many other central banks or countries basically doing the same thing. In addition, there's a little bit of discussion that they keep talking about limited supply of cryptocurrencies. But the realization is that you could invent as many cryptocurrencies as you want. So there's really not limited supply. Now, some people say yes, but only a few of those will be popular. That all the money's going in and the others are just going to be wannabes. Well, yes, that can work. So, I'm not going to argue the cryptocurrency is going to 100,000 or a million someday. I'm not going to argue, and that's Bitcoin. I'm not going to argue cryptocurrency is here to stay. But it seems like it's a bit political, and it seems like some people trade it because they want to fight against the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and the government and blah, 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 okay? And to me, the weird thing is the only way you can get Bitcoin is you got to work for U.S. dollars and then trade those into Bitcoin. Nobody works for Bitcoin, and I think that is a very important factor, that there is flaws in the pro-bullish camp of cryptocurrency. However, I think it is here to stay, okay? Any rate, put me down for a minor long-term bearish stance on Bitcoin, and we'll see where the rest of the cryptocurrencies go. But I would not be surprised to see a sizable collapse. The bulls got to get going and get it back above this month's high and sustain it for a few weeks before we can say, okay, maybe something's going differently, where instead it's going up for the next couple of years. All right, hopefully this is some assistance to you. I realize I don't have the fundamental modeling that we would require in many other markets. I don't think it's there, okay? I'm basing this on simply the behavior of how they're buying, selling, and prices. It's the core model and no expanded model whatsoever. Everything else is qualitative and opinion. But you know what? I've come to the conclusion that's all there is in Bitcoin. Qualitative opinion of the underlying fundamentals in economics. Otherwise, this is a technically quantitative price-driven market, and maybe all that is driven by, plus that political store value kind of cult thinking, if you would think. Okay, past results are not necessarily indicative of future results, and yes, I know I'm sounding very negative, but I think this kind of currency, if it is a currency at all, is here to stay, and it has more to develop. But I just feel like some people are overselling it to make it sound like, oh, you're going to be a multi-millionaire someday, and I think it's now limited. The multi-millionaires have already been made, unless you're going to invest huge amounts. And man, I don't see how anybody would dare recommend investing huge amounts. This can be a dangerous market. Thank you.